Hello, how's everybody doing? How has everybody been? Hopefully good. Hopefully they're applying themselves and just doing little things like that. That way they're actually able to progress forward instead of just wasting their time as usual. Basically in the last video I left off on people in the kingdom of darkness just bluffing, right? When you actually do blow past their bluffs and how they attempt to actually try to get you to stop fighting them and doing those sort of things, then obviously it doesn't realistically, just exposes everything that they essentially have been doing and all the damage that you actually have done to them so far. And so, it just gains so much, you get so much more of discernment when you do begin fighting against the enemy and doing those sort of things. As you know, obviously, he's actually able to teach you. You're able to see right through the tactics of the enemy when he comes inside of your life or in your life to try to cause you to actually deviate yourself from Christ's commandments. And then you're more than, likely to actually obey Christ in those instances, other than you always being so selfish and being you about every single one of those types of, you're very self-centered in those sort of um tests, and that's the main reason as to why you, in short, just continue failing and not realistically applying Christ's commandments to the situations and scenarios that do come in your life. Sadly, that's just realistically what it comes down to, is just your lack of actually engaging yourselves in spiritual warfare is the main reason why you have so many more problems that you could have avoided. All those things in themselves could have just been 100% avoidable had you engaged yourselves in spiritual warfare. That way, it was actually able to teach you, the reasons why certain situations do come in your life, and why the enemy is trying to desperately cause you to stop obeying Christ, and that way he actually has more of a foothold in your life to continue to progress his agenda for you in your life and advance it. And you're just like, well, whatever, I just had a bad day, type of things. But with these, acts of disobedience with God, because of his holiness, attributed to it, it's never like that. It's never like, oh, I just had a bad day. These in the long run, it makes it harder for you to actually, I know it doesn't seem like it at first because it's like, oh, it's just one day, right? Because of God's judgments and because of God's holiness, it makes it that much harder and more difficult for you to actually obey Christ when the situations do arise and they do come in your life. And you're just like, well, how am I supposed to, to you, it just begins to get harder and more difficult, compromise after compromise. And this is just in short how it actually has happened in your life. And many individuals aren't realistically able to discern. They weren't actually able to see right through the enemy's tactics. It's just because of, the flesh, it accumulates and, heaps iniquity on top of iniquity for your life. And so, because of, the past judgments and, the past sins and how you, in short, have been actually acting or reacting to certain situations that come in your life, this just makes it that much more difficult. It's the same exact teaching as whatever a man sows, that's what he's going to reap. And because you've been, sowing more in the flesh than you actually have been in the spirit, you're going to reap it back. And so, this is just, the main issues for many individuals that wanted to be Christians, and then now, they ended up falling and backsliding, and they don't actually want to be Christians anymore, devote their time and lives to Christ like, they once did. And, this is just the overall premise. I was there, I've been there, I've been in that type of path as well, where I actually was backsliding. And, these sort of judgments were just making it that much more difficult for me to actually be able to obey Christ in these sort of situations and instances. And I was just over here trying to be like, this super Christian, and I wasn't actually able to. And all of it just in part of me, just reaping what, it's way too much flesh. Obviously, the culmination of all the sins of my life was just making it that much more difficult for me to actually obey Christ when the situations did arise in my life. And that was just something that I realistically recognized. And other factors obviously weighed in these sort of scenarios that hindered me and just made it this enormous mental issue and this mental block for me to actually be able to uh you know to really live out Christ's commandments from my life. And this is just, the situations. If it happened to me, obviously it's happening to you. And this is something that I realistically have noticed. But this is more or less just for the Christians who don't realistically have that level uh, of willingness to actually leave, Christianity and other things like that, right? It is obviously to bring some awareness for the individual that wants answers, that wants to repent, and that wants to turn away from their wicked ways and amend their ways back to God and to the Father Himself. This is just more or less what actually has happened. You realistically do have to acknowledge the fact that you messed up. Had you actually have sown more in the spirit, you would reap spirit back. But because you have sown so much in the flesh, you're just getting it back that much more. And so it's something to realistically, keep in mind when you're actually just being so negligent and so careless towards these sort of little actions and acts of pettiness that you just do on a regular basis, or just petty, minuscule things that you often overlook. And those sort of instances as well, because that's just what is going to end up, uh, coming back around, and you're just gonna be like, dang, I should have never did that. I should have been more cautious, more careful. I should have wanted to be more obedient to God, and should have did little, little things like that, and little virtues I should have obeyed to be able to do those sort of things, for me to actually want to obey Christ more and to avoid those sort of, avoidable scenarios for your life. But so yeah, obviously that's just the overall premise of it all. It's just how much time you actually have been wasting, and because you've been wasting so much time, you realistically aren't meditating or just thinking about biblical and scriptural things for you to realistically be able to gravitate towards when the situations do arise, right? Instead, you're over here just thinking about the same old, and not realistically having any real direction for your life. And you're just like, well, where do I go from here? It's like, I know I have to do these sort of things in themselves. And it's like, well, yes, obviously everybody has to do them because, this is just the overall society that we actually that we live in, and other types of things like that. And that's just realistically the type of mentality that you need to get in, and you need to be able to really ponder and really think about it, and just be avoiding all the flesh and all the sins and the carnal side of things, and to just be focused and centered on wisdom, the Proverbs and Psalms and just other biblical things, and the commandment, and retaining this these scriptures, and not just reading it once and having a general idea of these things, but as you obviously rereading these things to the point that when the situations do arise and do come in your life, then you obviously are able to retain it, and because you retain it, you're going to put it to practice immediately. And obviously because of some basic premises, I was going to say premises and principles, because of basic premises, you already have common knowledge that you need to be abiding in Christ's commandments and His laws, and just overall principles like that for your everyday life, or it's not going to be realistically any point for you to remain being a Christian. I mean, you realistically need to go back to the Bible if you're finding it difficult to retain certain scriptures, and you're not realistically able to cope with the scenarios that do come in your life, which is perfectly normal and fine. You have to work your way up there, which is like, okay, it's not realistically anything for you to make this enormous deal of, and that's just something that I realistically wanted. This is the whole purpose as to me making this video, is overthinking, and how how much damage it realistically does do to the human mind and to the human brain. First I'm gonna just address the situation for what it actually is, that way you aren't you're realistically able to hearken and discern these sort of situations and scenarios when they do come in your life in the future. This is for like future references. So obviously 100% the demonic exists. Overthinking and the demonic and demons coming in your life are one and the same. Whenever any sort of situation ends up coming in your life, whether it's anxiety, you're socially anxious, you have a difficult time interacting with another individual, or right beforehand, you're about to interact with someone, you just begin overthinking, and you begin thinking, how am I supposed to react? How am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to do that? this is evidence of obviously demonic manifestations in your life and interference. And I know you don't want to address it like that because everybody wants to, hold down and maintain to that character and their overall individuality. These are the things that make them them. And my mind and how I think and the things that I think are just me, and sort of, those sort of things themselves. But you have to completely let that way of thinking go and just admit the fact that the demonic does exist. And once you actually do admit it, you're going to be able to recognize all the times that you actually have overthought was due to demonic manifestations of them realistically trying to gain some sort of foothold and try to cause you to fall into sin through temptations and through other means of you just being like, well, whatever, I've just always been like this. So you open the doors wide open for these devils to come in your life because you've always been like that, or this is just how life is. As you get older, my back hurts and my knees hurt, and other types of things like that realistically just all of it has to deal with the demonic side of things, of these devils obviously coming in your life. Other individuals teach you that not everybody's going to age as rapidly as you or them, and those are the types of lights and beacons for you to realistically look out for, or for you to be able to recognize it and to notice these sort of things in themselves for your life, and to just let Christ define what you should look like when you're at your age, and not let the devil gain some sort of an inch or foothold for your life, and whatever types of forms is going to take in your life, because it's going to take different forms, same exact principle, but just in different variations of the same exact thing. So it's something that you need to be able to recognize. But it's just something that I realistically was able to realize, just because my upbringing or whatever, 18, 19, 16, 17, I never really thought about anything, coming into contact with other individuals and just being able to talk with them. I know I kind of said that fast, but just being able to just be polite, be courteous, and if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, and just little key principles like that. But because individuals have just gotten into, they built it into a habit, and because they've built it into a habit, it automatically begins to be identified as who they actually are. I'm just an overthinker, I just overreact, and I just do other things like that. But with time, these sort of little habits are going to make their lives less manageable, and functionable as well. They're not going to be able to function in society as another individual who doesn't realistically care about anything else. And on top of other things, obviously, what is another main ambition and main goal of these devils, and the overall, the fruits of these sort of acts that the devils just cause you to overthink, and they rob you of your peace, in short. And and then other individuals come in your life and it's like a breath of fresh air for you, and you're just like, wow, I was overreacting about these sort of situations. I thought everybody was going to make fun of me because I did this and I did that. And it's just like, well, realistically, I'm not a judgmental person, and I just leave it off at that, right? And basically, little things like that is actually able to teach them to be able to help them to be able to let go of their overthinking, ways of living, and their overall mentalities and approaches towards certain situations that people just realistically don't care about, right? And that's just the overall premise, but this just takes so many different types of forms. Overthinking overthinking in itself is going to cause individuals to not obey Christ, because they're always going to be thinking about what others are going to think of them. And they obviously want to they twist scripture, right? I need to be at peace with everyone. And if it causes individuals to, obviously, who goes first and who comes first for you in your life is Jesus Christ. And just leave it off on that. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't have to validate any single individual's opinion, and other types of little things like that. The only individual that you realistically are trying to live your life to please is Christ himself, and everything else and everyone else obviously is not under that category, right? You obviously have a job, you have a duty for you to do on a regular basis, and is to serve Christ, and to be able to obey him at all times and instances. And not to be so pessimistic about these sort of things, but realistically, really evaluate and look at it like that, like at all times. And I can't do it, and I can't persevere, and I can't overcome, these sort of ways of thinking and mentalities and approaches that I just have been handling the gospel and sort of situations in my life, right? Because they're just holding you back. If you let go of those ways of thinking, obviously you're gonna be more, dedicated and committed to you doing it at all times. But it's just another sneaky tactic of the enemy that he tries to cause you to just hinder you and stop you completely before you realistically really reach that point, or you finally are able to let go of these sort of situations that were realistically caught and that you were being affected by, and you look back and you're just like, wow, it doesn't affect me as much. These are subtle forms of deliverance, but you're working a lot harder instead of working a lot smarter, and these things themselves just have to deal with you actually not wanting to confront the issues of the demonic and you actually overthinking. So, yeah, I already have common knowledge. Everybody overthinks, and because everybody quote unquote overthinks, it's basically just accepted. And because it's accepted, everybody accepts these demons that come in their life to cause them to overthink, and then whatever else doesn't sound like them, or they don't typically overthink these sort of situations. Obviously the demons aren't able to work in that aspect of life. Doesn't mean that they're not going to try. They're definitely going to try, but more or less they already have common ground and knowledge because of how many times they've already tried the same old tactics on a regular basis to know that they're going to repeatedly fail, and so they just move on to the next thing and to what they actually are able to do. This is just how the mind of a demon and how demons essentially work, all under the premise and guise of obviously you knowing right from wrong. And if you choose the wrong, obviously it belongs to them and you belong to them, and they're able to direct your footsteps and do other types of things like that. And you're just like, well, whatever, this is just my life, this is just how I live my life, and I can't do anything about it. Really just taking the blows type of approach to life. And realistically, Christ has already given you the means and the resources to never ever take the blows in any shape, way, or form, for your life and for other individuals' life. But if you just want to believe your pastors or believe whatever the world tells you to believe, then sadly, you're just going to continue letting other individuals get bullied and harassed in places that you weren't bullied and harassed, as well as you being bullied and harassed because you don't actually want to stand up for yourself and for, Christ's actual teachings of him giving you authority over all the power of the enemy, and those sort of principles and premises as well. But that was just something that I realistically wanted to make this video about, was just overthinking because of how dangerous it essentially is. They're able to really work in another individual's life, especially when it comes down to depression and suicide and other types of situations like that. Down the line, obviously, it just starts off from one negative thought, and from this little thought, because an individual doesn't know how to manage these sort of emotions. They don't know how to actually cope with these sort of situations in a healthy manner, or with a positive approach towards these sort of things themselves. And that's why they obviously spiral downhill, downward. And they're just like, well, I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to handle these sort of situations. And you're just like, well, and through these little overthinkings and the realistically and over exaggerations of certain situations that everybody goes through and everybody encounters, they really make them feel alone and like nobody understands them, or because it hasn't happened to them exactly in that manner, or they haven't been through half of the things that another individual has been through, that automatically means that they don't care. But it's just very sad. They really try to isolate an individual to ensure that they're not actually able to get some sort of uh, logic and common sense towards the way that they actually are handling these sort of situations, that you're not alone in these sort of things, and these sort of suffrages and situations in your life. And people will always support you, and people will always love you, whether they're complete strangers or your family members or whatever the case may be, And that's just something that you have to be willing to accept, that you're not actually alone, that you obviously, you get stubborn and other types of things like that, then obviously that's still more demonic, warfare against you to try to get you to, kill yourself, because the overall end game for that is always hell. So that's something that you need to be able to recognize, that they're just trying to cause you to uh, to throw yourself and to throw your entire life away, and you realistically don't have to view it like that. Like, oh man, I needed this one special girl to actually tell you these sort of to tell you these sort of things, but trust me, I already been there. I already have that level of common ground and knowledge, especially to know that nobody's coming to save you, and you have to be perfectly accepting and content with that nobody's coming to save you, because you have to do these things for you and for yourself. I already had that same exact, mentality, and I already been through those same exact shoes. And it's like you want somebody to come and save you, and you want someone to actually help you out. But, sadly, nobody ever came and saved me out of that way of thinking except Christ himself. Through his grace and mercy, that was the only means for me to realistically really be saved. And even then, for the most part, it didn't take until like 3 more years after that, those initial feelings and, realization of no one coming to save me, and because nobody's coming to save me, I need to suck it up. That type of mentality. And then like 3 years later, I was just like, oh, whatever. And now that I'm over it, I'm actually able to recognize and see that, this is just how life essentially is. And, you don't get a happy ending. I didn't get a happy ending. And because of that, you need to just pick the pieces up from the floor and just, you need to leave the pieces on the floor and just move on, because it realistically is not even anything. And yeah, hopefully you're actually able to follow that example. I know it's just like, wow, like in those current instances, it's just like, man, it seems impossible for you to realistically be able to really let go and to really accept these sort of things. But I mean, you have to put yourselves in those sort of shoes. Like, what if nobody even comes to actually save me? I mean, what options are you left with? You're left with just moving forward and just doing these things into bettering yourself. I mean, that's the easiest way that I could actually, is to tell you, because I've already been through those shoes. It is nothing, and still living in the same exact way of thinking that it's nice and convenient for people to actually fight for you, but nobody's coming to save me. So, obviously I'm still a human in that aspect of things. And it's like, okay, well, that sucks. But for real, obviously there's going to be other individuals that are actually able to help you out and want to help you out because they have the full ability and the resources to be able to do those things. So you're definitely excuse me, you're definitely not alone in these sort of instances, and that's just something that you need to be able to really accept, because I know you want to be stubborn about these sort of situations, because it's like the way these sort of situations make you feel, they get you really wrapped up in your emotions about this and that. Alcohol and liquor you need to avoid entirely, because it's just going to amplify these sort of emotions. But all of these are just from the same old reasons: overthinking. You're overthinking these sort of situations, and because of it, you're not realistically able to view these events, rationally and logically, and you're just like, well, it's like, well, yeah, obviously there's 10,000 other types of individuals that are going through the same exact uh, thing that you're going through in the same exact moment, and that's just something that you need to be able to understand, that you're not alone in these sort of situations, and it's fine, all of you can have common ground in that, and that's okay. And you don't really have to worry about anyone else or what they have to say. It's just obviously bettering one another, correct? It's doing it for each other, because you know how it actually feels in those scenarios and instances. And yeah, basically I was just, trying to make this video just to bring awareness for individuals, and just to avoid the situations entirely when, they do begin to notice that they're actually overthinking, or, they feel anxious, or these are symptoms of overthinking, or, they feel, fear, or they feel panic, or they feel, these sort of situations, these sort of things in these sort of situations, then need to be able to address it, and gain that level of discernment to know what is actually happening. They're just overthinking, which is just nothing. It's just all demonic. You could just avoid it, ignore it completely, and then it's like whatever. It doesn't realistically matter at all, and that's it, because it'll slowly begin forming itself into a habit, and then you're actually able to confront these sort of situations in the future, and you're not as phased by it, or phased at all by it whatsoever, and you're actually able to really interact with other individuals, to be neighborly, to be hospitable, to do those sort of things, and to actually be able to interact with them and as normal, healthy, sane, rational human being. And that would be the overall, goal and the end game for those sort of things themselves. As you just begin to, really detach yourselves from your old ways of thinking and really adapt and accept new coping mechanisms and skills for your life and your day-to-day lives. And everybody just goes through it. Some individuals just they have a higher foundation than you or a higher plateau than you do, and because of it they're actually able to function with more individuals or in more situations than you are. Social anxiety and other types of things like that are going to cripple them from being able to be neighborly towards another individual and with other people, and that's just one of the main issues as well. Overthinking, that just seems to be the main problem for many individuals, that they're not actually able to really uh, understand the real cause of these sort of reasoning as to why they're not actually able to really flow and really interact with other individuals. Maybe they're actually able to notice more people. They actually are able to be neighborly and polite and courteous and other types of things like that where they realistically lack in, and that's fine. It just has to do with you not putting it to practice enough, or not asking Christ for graces to be more neighborly and to do those sort of things, and to gain more wisdom for you to realistically be able to interact with more people, and for sort of situations and scenarios. You're gaining that level of experience, and you're gaining more experience to be able uh, to really be confident in these sort of situations, because you've already dealt with these sort of situations in one way, shape, or form. And that's good. It's generally praiseworthy. You don't want to be just stuck there clueless. Just, how do I interact with this individual? Or an individual is choking. You don't even know how to perform CPR or the Heimlich maneuver. And you're just like, oh, what do I do? Or you're scared, or you're overthinking, and these things themselves are crippling you from being able to really perform the Heimlich maneuver because of it. And all of it has to do with lack of graces and lack of knowledge as to why these situations were even happening. But grace and peace be multiplied to you. The grace to know what I'm saying, the peace to know that it's sent from God, and the mercies to be able to receive these graces, and the love of the Lord Jesus Christ and the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ are in your hearts and be with you all. So yeah, overthinking and the main issues as to why individuals aren't realistically able to interact with more people. I mean, these things are just so simple and so basic to be able to understand once you realistically really do. And you just think back to the sort of situations where you aren't actually able to practice Christ's commandments, virtues, or wisdoms, to certain situations that do come and arise in your life. All of it having to do with just means to be able to prevent you and hinder you from actually doing a good work and from doing something that is essentially good. These are just means and roadblocks and detours from you, actually, for you, from to stop you completely doing something that realistically the devils don't want you to do. They love it. They love being able to hinder you just by you actually overthinking and doing those sort of things themselves. And then you're just like, well, what am I supposed to do in this situation? I know how to do these sort of things, and then I don't, I got stage fright, I got this, I got that. I didn't even bother standing up to the bully, or standing up to other individuals to protect the innocent, the weak, and other types of situations that everybody just experiences. Everybody has experience in at one point, right? And this just means that they essentially do. But from the Christian aspect of it, they try to cause you to overthink, to be able to stop you from really obeying Christ, and to really put in those sort of teachings to practice for their life. And they're just like, well, what are they going to think about me? These individuals are secular, and they do this and they do that. So the overall main point of it all is to be able to affect your mind, to cause you from doing a good work, right? And that's the overall premise of it. They're going to completely paralyze you through fear by attacking your mind, primarily and firstly. That would be the overall goal and the overall, basis of it all. And this just takes so many different forms. It's, is mind blowing, right? And it's the same exact, tactic over and over again, how they attempt to actually attack the mind, to be able to cause you to stop you from, doing and obeying Christ's commandments. And so these types of individuals just want to have, but these things themselves are sins, right? You letting your mind get in the way of you actually obeying Christ and, doing a good work and doing those sort of things has to deal with your fear of retaliation of the enemy, when in reality you need to be fearing God instead of fearing Satan. It doesn't even make sense whatsoever for you to actually fear an individual that is being controlled by, Jesus Christ himself. But it doesn't really click in your head. And because you expect Christ to be understanding of you and the situation that you're in those times, you don't bother actually, really disciplining yourselves and being strict with your minds and just actually wanting and just impulsively obeying Christ in these sort of situations that come in your life for the specific purpose to bring these sort of things to your awareness, or for you to actually finally be able to just gain more credit and more of a character in Christ's eyes. That way he's actually able to cause you to, to see that you actually are bearing more fruit and that you actually are maturing. And so, the axe is finally, removed from the root of your tree, which is you, because you just were not producing any fruit. So this is a very real reality for all Christians. And because of Christ's intelligence and intellect, he's actually able to really bring some harm and evil over your head for your lack of obedience to him. And because of it, you're just an evil individual. You realistically do want to be more selfish, and on the selfish side of things, that you don't actually want to obey Christ because you want to be all about you. And because you just want to be all about you, you don't want to deny yourself completely to actually be more Christ-like and to pick up your cross and follow after Christ. And it doesn't really seem like that in those times, in those instances, but once you actually do overcome those sort of situations, and you're able to look back, you're actually able to really dissect and really confront what was actually causing you to and what was stopping you from really practicing Christ's commandments out for your life. And that's just the same types of scenarios and instances that everybody has encountered at one point, and it's just so sad for you to actually look back and to see how stupid and foolish you essentially were, that your mindset and just how you weren't really able to finally let go of these sort of behaviors and destructive habits were the main reasons as to you not actually being able to obey Christ in those sort of scenarios. And all these things themselves having to deal with just fear, right? Overthinking, and the overall mental attack on your life and for your Christian walk with Christ. And that's just something that Christ himself wanted individuals to know for certain, is that they're attacking your mind first and foremost to be able to get to your heart. And if they actually are able to really advance through your mind, it already was inside of your heart, which is just something that individuals aren't actually able to acknowledge, right? It's just, how are these things a heart issue if I just thought these sort of, things themselves? It having to deal with you actually not letting your heart really be firm in Christ's commandments and his doctrines and the spirit itself. That was the real main, issue and root cause of these sort of things themselves. And that's why, the devil is actually able to whisper these sort of, lies and temptations in your ear to cause you to fall into sin, and you actually fearing the retaliation, or you not actually able, not being able to, live out Christ's teachings for your life in every single way, shape, or form and instance that is going to, take in your life, and just in your regular walk with Christ, and that you're not actually able to acknowledge that this is just what Christ does on a regular basis. And because you don't acknowledge that Christ does it on a regular basis, you don't bother preparing for it. You don't bother actually praying to be able to pass these sort of tests and to actually be able to avoid these sort of failures and failings, because it's completely avoidable. And being able to acknowledge the fact that how avoidable these things actually are, for it to give you the confidence for you to know in the future that you're going to pass those tests, instead of just being hindered by your own negativity and pessimistic way of living and lifestyle that the devil has in short. already placed a trap in your life to be able to stop you completely and to hinder you. These are obstacles, right, that are going to cause you to not um, really be confident, to be able to know for certain that you're going to pass these tests. Just be confident. It's that simple. You don't realistically have to worry about, and obviously the overthinking is going to come right after that, right? To be confident, and then, how do I know? It's all 100% demonic, and that's just something that you need to be able to acknowledge and begin to work that, habit out for your life, to be able to gain that level of discernment, to know when they actually are attacking your mind, and when they actually are causing you to overthink. Because realistically, now you don't really recognize it, because this is just how you essentially have been operating in your life, and you're just like, well, whatever, this is just how I've been all my life. How could I be an overthinker? It's like, yeah, I do notice that in certain instances. Oh, my bad. In certain situations, I do overthink, and this is something that I typically tend to avoid, because I know what it's actually going to cause for me and myself. It's all spiritual warfare. All of it in itself is just causing you to be able to gain more of a territory and advantage in your life, to be able to destroy you further and further and further. Just plan after plan, and territory after territory. This is just how they actually are able to do it. First, it could have been you just actually being confident in your youth, and in your vigor, and how young you essentially were, until they ensure just take that confidence away from you while you're just getting older, and other types of things like that. You don't even bother being bold about it, or those sort of things themselves. You don't realistically really let Christ define your youth and your vigor, how long it should last. And because of it, the devils are in short being your shepherd in those instances, and you're just like, well, this is just my life. And if you just continue with that same way of thinking, and you just continue to let these devils shepherd you, what is going to be the end result of it? You're going to be 125 by the time you're 30, and so you already have common knowledge of these things themselves, of how bad it essentially is to let another individual decide and dictate, and especially when they do have the power to be able to cause you to age rapidly. What is going to happen, right? They're going to take full advantage of it, but because of other little, principles and foundations that you live by, like, I'm 30 years old. I'm not gonna look that old by that time, but there's still the certain level of aspect that is actually going to cause you to age, a lot sooner and a lot quicker, because of it. But this is just one example, and because it's just one example, I'm not realistically really addressing the type of form it takes in your life, because it takes so many different forms, and especially for you as a Christian, it does take a form in your walk with Christ that is hindering it 10 times more than it needs to be hindered, through these sort of principles themselves. But just personify it, and just be able to accept it, and just walk away from it, and to be able to let it go. Because obviously there's a more excellent way than how you, in short, have been handling these sort of situations. And that's just what it comes down to, right? How have you been handling these sort of situations? How do you handle overthinking? Do you completely negate it and blow past it, or you just continue entertaining these thoughts? Let me remind you that it is a sin to entertain wicked and evil thoughts, and let alone to just be an overthinker. If you're over here pondering about wisdom and certain means to be able to practice, and what verse to practice out first, and other types of, obviously that's completely different. I'm talking about overthinking, things that actually cause you to negative thoughts, and to just make you react in sort of situations that people just generally don't react towards. And people typically get in this way of thinking that everybody's judgmental, right? People are very judgmental people, and because they're very judgmental people, they say all these sort of things, and they're just rude, disrespectful, and that's fine. I'm just me, and because of it, you attempt to build this level of worth up. That way, in this wall up, the individuals aren't actually able to tear it down, because you view it as strength to give an attitude. That's what individuals, in short, have an attitude problem, and they have this enormous and this giant attitude. It's like, they're very difficult individuals to deal with, types of situations. But there was a moment in their life where they realistically didn't act like that. They were more vulnerable than they are when you actually are witnessing them, and that's perfectly fine. You need to be able to recognize that it's perfectly okay to be vulnerable. It's just how you actually cope with the situations where individuals betray vulnerability that cause you and cause the real problems to come in your life, and you just don't know how to cope with those sort of types of situations. And because you don't know how to cope with them, you build walls up. You do these sort of things to be able to not be viewed as a weak individual, so people don't take advantage of you because you're vulnerable, and other types of things like that. Another saying that individuals have in this society is, don't mistake my kindness for weakness, right? And it doesn't mean I'll still knock you out, and it's like, come on, man, you can realistically let go of your pride in those sort of times, and when it comes down to those things in themselves. But people just obviously are terrified. They're being used, and they're being manipulated, and more, right, based off these sort of things themselves, having to deal with the overall mental issue and how they actually have been coping, and what they actually have been taught to cope with these sort of situations when an individual actually does come in your life to be shady and to be grimy to you. How are you going to react, right? You're going to assert dominance by having an attitude, and that's it. And people are going to recognize that you're a strong, independent woman, and you don't back down for nothing. And these are stupid things that people typically just gravitate towards, because it emulates strength and other types of garbage like that. Christ has a whole another different a definition of strength that you are nowhere near, and that's just what you need to be able to gravitate towards automatically, is to be able to define these things according to Christ's strength, and according to Christ's definitions of strength and what it really does mean to be. Some individuals are very envious of other people that are realistically able to let go of certain situations that they would never let go, because it's just an enormous deal. And even wording it like that, to be able to belittle and demean situations that realistically would have an impact on their life, and against their overall ego and person. But realistically, all of it has to deal with a whole bunch of things and principles, and just being able to be rational and view these situations just normally. It's like, well, when these sort of situations that happen to everyone on a regular basis, and matter of fact, individuals just are able to cope with these situations better than I'm able to cope with them. And that's perfectly fine and content, but you can't be stuck in the same way of thinking that this is how you are supposed to react to these sort of situations for the rest of your life. You're a human being. You have to grow, you have to learn, and you have to mature. And for you to just be stuck in those ways of thinking, and to think that that's how you essentially need to be governed, and be governed by for the rest of your life, it would just be erroneous and stupid on your part. There's no real need or necessity for individuals to continue living those ways of thinking out. It's just completely irrational, and but people nevertheless continue living that way of thinking now, and everybody on the face of this earth lives that same principle out. Very few individuals are actually able to let go and blow past the past struggles, traumas, and suffrages that ended up causing them to lose faith and trust in other men, and other types of individuals like that. But other people just don't care. They already have common knowledge that people are just going to be people, and that's fine. I'm only accountable for myself, and that's realistically it. It doesn't make me a weak person to let individuals walk all over me, and it doesn't make me a strong person to not let individuals walk all over me. And that just seems to be the overall lack of knowledge, for the ignorant, right? It's just they think that it makes them strong to not let other individuals walk all over them. You need to be able to overlook and let go of these sort of situations, because you realistically have never met this individual prior to your interaction, that when they walked all over you, it's not even worth it. Your pride is not worth your eternity, because you will end up going into the lake of fire for these little mishaps and these little attitudes and approaches. So just get rid of them now. I'm gonna help you get rid of them now, right away, because it's just a mental issue. That it's just demonic, like I mentioned earlier in the video, that individuals aren't realistically able, whatever the world has taught them how they need to react and cope with these sort of situations, is the main reasons as to why they have so many issues, and why they have so many, and just how they essentially just handle these situations that do come in their life. And it's just really sad in all honesty, had it been taught better, or just by an individual that has more knowledge and is actually able to really, confront these issues for what they actually are and to see it at face value, they will be able to recognize it's just foolish to continue living those ways of thinking now. But because everybody, birds of a feather flock together, each one is encouraging their own destruction, and each one is encouraging more, degeneration and degradation, or whatever that word is, to cause them to realistically be just petty. And you know you continue working their craft out, and it just perfects their pettiness, and it just makes it worse. And once they get short, you just get meaner and pettier. It is really hard for them to actually let go, because it's working for them, and more or less you're getting money out of it, and they're finessing people, and that's just realistically what it is. But the overthinking aspect of it all is just demonic. All of it having to deal with individuals just being heavily bombarded by demonic temptations that they already have been accustomed to coming and happening in their life. They already have accepted it, and because they've already accepted it as normal and the norm, they don't see a remedy or a different life for them to actually be able to really uh, not have those sort of suffrages, or those sort of habits be in their daily routine, and when they actually do function and interact with other individuals. These are crippling habits that are causing them to not really function in society. And to you, it's just like, well, whatever, just take a picture of me, and I don't really care who watches me, and I don't really do this, and I don't do, but other individuals just like, no, get the camera away from me, and they just get mad, and they get anxious, and it just opens so many more strategies and plans for the enemy to come in their life, because now this individual is living in fear, and now this individual is not realistically able to function normally and properly, because they care too much. And and things like that. But all of it having to deal with the overall mental issue of it all. Maybe you're nervous about how people view you, and maybe you're just like, well, man, I've been like this all in my life, and I don't know how, it's just how individuals view me. I need to make a good first impression, but yet you're putting so much more pressure on you that will cause you and hinder you to not really be at your peak and at how you really are at its core. And it's whatever, honestly. You don't realistically have to focus on those ways of thinking and those lifestyles. All you have to realistically focus and want for you and yourself is to be better and better, to cope with these sort of situations in a healthier manner than you did prior, and then after that, and after that, and after that, and so on and so on and so on, until you obviously are continuing to build on top of this, character and virtues that you already have in your life, right? That's the Christian approach to it. But for Christians, obviously, it's the same old situation. Once you realistically are able to really integrate all of Christ's commandments and teachings into your overall daily routines and character, then obviously you can just continue building on top of that. So there's this overall progression, and this overall continuation as a Christian, is that Christ's standard obviously is the standard. That's the foundation that you essentially live everything in all sorts of situations in your life, and that's fine, right? You're content with that. Everybody's content with that. But obviously there is always a more excellent way, even a more excellent way than Christ's commandments. And because they're commandments, everything that is a more excellent way than that should be viewed as commands, not suggestions. And it just opens your eyes to how blind you essentially were, to be able to recognize that anything and everything good has to do with commandments, the Father's heart, his character and person that you were essentially created in. Same exact image, and that's what Christ in short has actually been wanting you to acknowledge and to be able to accept, and not be so immature about these sort of temptations, and to be so immature about these sort of teachings of Christ when they do come in your life, because all of it having to deal with your overall reconciliation back to the fall of man, and back to the glory of man before we essentially fell. And that's just what Christ essentially wants from you and out of you, is your willingness to actually conform yourself to that perfect plan of salvation. That's fine, but you realistically need to begin working and wanting to to get to that point, to be able to finally live those ways of thinking out. Uh, and yeah, but deliverance obviously has to do with, working a lot smarter instead of working harder. Overthinking is going to be the main reasons as to you not being able to really embrace that lifestyle out for yourself, and to really walk these sort of principles out for yourself and for your family members and for other individuals, to be able to teach them the same exact things that you essentially have been taught. And so yeah, I'm breaking all these curses up and these seals up. That way you're actually able to throw these hindrances, obstacles, and blockades out of your mind, your heart, your soul, your will, and your emotions, because they're affecting you. And obviously, right, these little demonic manifestations and presences were causing you, and this is something that you need to be able to understand, that it was very real. They were causing you to not actually love your enemies, to bless those that curse you, to be so forgiving and overlooking of certain situations that come and happen in every single individual's life. And obviously it was that serious, sadly, for you. You weren't realistically able to gain. You didn't have that level of discernment to know how much of an impact these sort of blockades and obstacles were doing in your life. You just thought, I was just like, well, whatever, once I finally get over it, then I'll get over it. And sadly, it just didn't work like that. You were never going to get over it, because these things were just going to continue to heap, and they were going to perfect their little their work to try to get it integrated inside of your character. But all these sort of actions and acts and habits of yours are never a part of your character. The only things that realistically really are a part of your character and who you essentially are at its core is being neighborly and just doing good characteristics and qualities like that you just naturally gravitate towards, because you already have common knowledge and ground that these are just Christian principles and life principles that everybody just realistically needs to have common ground in, to know for certain that we're going to be neighborly towards one another. I mean, it sounds like a Care Bear movie type of thing, but realistically that's just what essentially is. Reality is, it's not going to happen like that. But the reality is that you're only accountable for yourself and your actions, and you still have to be holding yourselves diligently and strictly towards this very real principle for your life, because it's a commandment of Christ. There's so many implications of it all throughout the scriptures for you to be able to really acknowledge and accept this as truth. But we read different types of translations. The King James version of it, the types of Bible is this, that cause you to actually be able to think that this is how you need to react to these sort of situations. And it's just silly. You don't realistically have to really be so stuck in one translation, but to really figure out the wording and the overall intent as to why they were saying the things that they were saying, because it just goes over your head. Sadly, you don't realistically understand it, because the ifs and the whatever else that comes in these videos just play a role in it. But it's nothing to I had to learn that lesson as well, that the King James Bible version is not just the only Bible version. There's just so many types of translations, the lexicon and interlinears and other types of things like that that will help you to understand just very basic principles either way, to just do good and to just do good things, and to love your neighbor as yourself in another way, in another form, and to love your enemy as yourself, to bless those that curse you. The same exact thing. All of Christ's commandments is the same exact, one commandment, to love your enemy as yourself and to love your neighbor as yourself. And, it's just one and the same for you to be able to understand. That's in short why Christ said, that the law and the prophets hang on those two commandments, to love your neighbor as yourself and to love God first. Because if you put God first, you're obviously going to do good to your neighbor and to do these sort of things, and you actually have some sort of direction in your life because you love God and you're doing everything for righteousness' sake and for holiness' sake. And so hopefully you are able to gain more of an understanding towards the gospel itself, and as to the reasons as to why you need to be able to be ambitious to and driven to do these sort of principles and virtues and to act these sort of actions out, to be more Christ-like and to want to be more Christ-like. Or, there's no real point. Christ is going to end up cutting you off, definitely, and that's just something that you need to be able to really accept. I said it like 3 times already, but really accept these things themselves. People don't want to accept that they don't actually produce the amount of fruits that Christ actually wants them to produce. Instead of just barely doing enough, then they're going to die. They think that this somehow makes them a Christian, but overall, it's just at face value, it's lukewarm. It's a very lukewarm approach towards some, very on fire principles that Christ wants you to be able to accept and to know that they're commandments. But to you, it just goes over your head again, and you don't actually recognize how stupid and foolish you essentially are in Christ's eyes. And this is why you have so many more suffrages, pain and turmoil, and you're just like, oh, what am I supposed to do now in these sort of situations? And all of it having to deal with just your overall approach and overthinking, and they cause you to overthink enough to the point that you actually don't accept these as commandments. And because you don't accept them as commandments, the overall strictness of it and the overall discipline aspect of it is just non-existent in those instances. And that's the main issue of it all. That's why you struggle with so many more suffrages that could have been avoidable. Is just because that element of strictness and discipline is just not there. And obviously you need to take my own advice, right? Because it takes form in some way for everyone that's walking on the face of this earth. So you need to be able to have that inside of your heart, in your vessel, to be able to really evaluate and really check yourself, right? To know for certain in what way, shape, or form are you actually, act in this way of thinking. Because at face, to the naked eye, to the blind eye, or just how you essentially just view these things, it's like, well, I don't think anything's wrong with me. But once you realistically really just sit down and just look at your life, just like, wow, yeah, you know what, I actually am, going down a slippery slope, and I'm not realistically really acknowledging, the possible dangers that I am sure can cause for myself and for my life, just because of my overall confidence, arrogance, and cockiness, right? And that's more or less what ends up happening. People get overly confident in their own capabilities and abilities because they're comfortable in their comfort, and they in short just have not realistically have caused anything to cause them to shake their faith, to make them to really question what they actually believe. And because of these little refining tools that Christ uses, they just err, they backslide, and they don't cope with these sort of situations in the future and pass with flying colors because they aren't preparing themselves at all. There's no real drive, there's no real anything, no ambition, no growth, maturity at all on their end. And this is just the overall premise of why you actually are walking here on earth, and that's why Christ does every single type of scenario and situation, whether it's overthinking or whether it's listening to these sort of videos, and or just being able to acknowledge and listen to correction, right? Not everything is a debate. Some of these things in themselves are genuine correction, whether Christ is actually sending an individual in your life to be able to correct you, or whether you're just being arrogant, you don't want to accept correction, and individuals are obviously doing it for that specific intent. All of these things having to deal with how you essentially have been handling these sort of situations, how you handle them. All of it is just it's your fault. That's it. There's not realistically anything that you could do about it but accept the error of your ways. That way you actually can amend your ways with Christ, because all of these little errors that I just brought up to your attention are sins. There's only right and wrong with Christ. Is right and right, and wrong and wrong, and that's it. There's nothing else that you could essentially do with God about how he essentially wants to run things, because you're not God. And it's just that simple. It doesn't matter what another individual is if everyone is just operating on the same exact premise of living in this realm of creation, and your creation, and you're not creator. And it's just realistically that simple, but people just don't acknowledge it to that extent. They don't simplify it to that, because they're obviously after knowledge and doing those sort of things. And they're not after God's own heart, they're after knowledge. to get the praises of men, because that's in short what they actually get. They don't get anything else. And when they actually go after God's own heart, what it actually ends up happening, change, real definite change, transformative change occur in their lives. And it's scary, right? You've been comfortable for this time, and nothing, and finally something ends up coming in your path that just shakes you to your core, and you're just like, what am I supposed to do now? I've never handled this sort of situation in any way, and what am I supposed to do? Just get out of your comfort zone and grow and want to mature and want to accept these sort of little principles for your life. That way you could actually benefit from these sort of situations, or you're not going to, sadly. And if you don't realistically really accept that way of thinking for yourself, you're never going to grow, sadly. And even if you do grow, it's going to be a definite miracle, because Christ is going to cut you off. You're going to get rebuked after rebuke and rebuke and rebuke and rebuke, and for what? It's just going to cause you to die, and you're never going to get out of that vortex that Christ himself has rebuked you into because of your stubbornness, and your overly confident, and your cockiness, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, so I'm still casting these things out by the legion, just because I got to. And these overthinking elements are just cloaked in demonic manifestations, iniquities, and heart issues that are just causing you to be more susceptible to these sort of temptations and scenarios to fall into sin, and to not actually practice a good workout, or to actually practice one of Christ's commandments. And that's it. It really is deep, because if you end up continuing to practice these sort of acts out, you're going to end up perishing and going into the lake of fire. But they're simple. There's simple remedies to be able to get rid of them. You just cast out your thoughts and negative thoughts and all that negativity. You cleanse your whole vessel of negative energies and negative spirits. I know that's what it sounds like, but realistically, that's what it is. You're just cleansing your mind of negative thoughts and unwanted attitudes and approaches to regular, normal, common things and acts and actions. Yeah, it's that simple. I'm going to be loosing the remedies in your mind, your heart, your soul, your will, and your emotions by the legion, because if I don't, you're never going to get better, sadly. You need to know, you need to be able to understand that it is only by grace that you will get delivered, and you will remain delivered. Whether it's you actually wanting to pick up the Bible and to continue to be consistent with that, to read the Bible and to pray and to do those sort of things, all of it has to be on the basis alone that is by grace through faith, because it's the gospel, and that's how you ensure have been saved from your own sinful actions and from your own sins, by grace through faith, because Christ is your Savior. Deliverance is very much necessary and very crucial for every Christian, and teach other individuals to do it, and teach more people to do it. Yeah, I'm casting these things out by the legion still, and I'm loosing them up by the legion still. Hopefully you're actually able to be more, encouraged to continue on this path, and to do more good works, and to do more good things that Christ himself wants you to do, as well as to be able to be confident that you need to be able to avoid the overthinking aspect of your life, and to be able to, pinpoint and address the real problems and the real reasons as to why you have social anxiety, and why you aren't realistically able to function in a healthy manner, to overthink sort of situations that because you think that people are just judgmental. Nobody thinks the way that you do, sadly, and nobody is going to like the same things that you like at the same level and at the same amount that you like those sort of things. Only you like the things that you like at that level, and only you think the way that you think, sadly. People just don't care, I realize that, and that's fine, and people have realized that when they actually do talk to me, and it is what it is. It's on you, and it's on your fault that you made yourself more susceptible to these sort of, demonic manifestations when they did come in your life. Because if you didn't actually think like that whatsoever, you would have completely shrugged it off and you would have been able to interact with that individual or another person more confidently. But that didn't happen, obviously, right? What ends up happening, you're just like, oh, well, I don't know what to do in this situation. I'm tripping, I'm overreacting. And then you just stay stuck and you just stay stuck in your own thoughts. And you're just like, wow, I can't believe all this stupid. This individual really doesn't care. Or, other types of, means to be able to, snap you back into your right mind. That way you don't actually overthink, right? Uh, yeah, definitely. You need to be able to understand that as well, that people are just not generally, typically judgmental, and that's just fine. And you don't have to get to that point neither, as I'm sure more individuals just continue being judgmental and even get into that judgmental aspect of it as a self-defense mechanism, because they're afraid of looking weak and vulnerable, and they're just used to having everything that they want, and individuals not harassing them or bullying them, and they have the game all twisted, and it's not even like that. They got it all twisted, right? It's not like that whatsoever. People generally want the very best for them, and the individuals who who have ulterior motives will continue to act like they have the very best for you, and they're not even going to cause you to overthink whatsoever, because you think that they're actually trying to help you out. So obviously, what is that going to bring to your attention and awareness? That you need to be on your guard and on your toes. One last thing, the peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes. The overall, teaching and premise of that is the fact that it wasn't even meant to be a prophecy. It was meant to be a proverb, for individuals to be able to acknowledge that, to always be on your toes and to never be caught off guard, because what ends up happening, what's just common for individuals to be able to, to do. An individual tells them peace and security and safety, they completely relax. They drop their guards and they don't actually bother being as disciplined and strict with themselves than if they didn't say peace and security and safety, or they didn't know it was peaceful and security. It's just so many other types of things that individuals don't really equate and understand. Some of these they're just proverbs, and these are just means to be able to how to live your life, and to ensure that you don't actually get caught off guard in whatever shape or form these things in themselves actually do take, to be able to acknowledge for certain that you need to be on your toes at all point and at all times in your life, to know for certain and for sure that you cannot be caught off guard, regardless of what an individual actually promises you over the base on the basis alone of being your gardener. Well, I totally said that opposite. You're a warrior in the garden instead of a gardener in a war. So you need to be prepared for all sorts of situations and scenarios that are going to come in your life, and not just if and when, because it will. Christ being Christ, he does these things on purpose to be able to catch you off guard. So be prepared and have some direction for yourselves and for your life. But yeah, honestly, these things themselves are just so simple and so easy. You don't realistically have to overcomplicate them, because they're just that easy. I've been on that path and on that road as well, to be able to think that these things in themselves are just these super incredible difficult feats that you actually need to jump over hoops and do 10 million backflips to actually be able to finally get some results and to see some results in your life. But it realistically is never like that, sadly. And looking back, it's just like, wow, I wasted so much time thinking that it was finally going to come to me in the way, shape, or form that I know it's going to come to me. But these things themselves are just a lot more simpler than you actually think, and that you want to believe, because you don't understand it. You don't understand how easy these things can be. And sadly, that's just what seems to be the case, right? You need that understanding to know why they're that easy. you don't even have the knowledge to be able to understand this, at least. So you just need to believe these words and to take the leap of faith. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. So yeah, still losing more strategic graces in your vessel by the Legion and in your mind. That way you actually are finally able to be delivered and avoid the overthinking aspect of your life, to finally gain that level of peace and confidence when you actually do approach and talk and interact with another individual is what I'm meant to say. In Jesus Christ's name, amen. Thank you. Hail Jesus Christ. What else? Yeah, thank you. Love you. Bye.